Coming up on this edition of Perspectives, U.S. President Joe Biden has made his announcement on federal student debt loan forgiveness. Many new details have emerged on how the historic plan will all work. But the question is it enough? We discuss that more on this edition of Perspectives with yours truly, Daren Jaime.
What's on your mind?
Let 'em know.
Express what's on your mind. What's on your mind?
Let 'em know. Anything relevant to life, you bring it to the table. Whether you make a move solo or a movement with a stable. No fables, you speak on your decisions. Cause in the long run, it's your voice, your views, your vision. Keeping it real with many messages for you to know. This ain't radio, but DJ runs the show. Entertainment, he rocks it. Politics, he locks it. The host with the most would handle any topic. Don't forget to share your perspective with shines of light. Cause it might make a difference in someone else's life.
Make a difference in someone's life. Express what's in your heart and your mind. Share your perspective.
And hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Perspectives. I am Daren Hyman. Of course, we thank you for joining us. As always, you can watch Perspectives every week here on BronxNet's Channel 67. We invite you to stay connected to us on our social media platforms at BronxNet TV, and of course, our website at bronxnet.org. If you're looking to reach me on social media, well, you can do that. Daren C. Jaime is our professional page on Facebook, and then on Instagram and Twitter, DC Jaime 23. There you can find some information and possibly even some inspiration as well. Well, coming up, we go front and center on today's show about U.S. President Joe Biden announcing he will forgive $10,000 in federal student debt for most borrowers, and Biden will cancel up to $20,000 for recipients of Pell Grants. Now, the relief will be limited to Americans earning under $125,000 a year or $250,000 for married couples or heads of households. Here to break all of this down and what this means, we've got the Executive Director of Sensibility, a not-for-profit dedicated to educating students to achieve their financial goals. A friend of the show, Roy Paul. And Roy, good to have you.
I'm so happy to be alive to do this.
Yeah, I mean, you don't take life for granted anymore. Talk to me a little bit about as the president announced this and this came down, a lot of people have been talking about student loan forgiveness for a long time, but give me your immediate reaction when you heard that the president was going forward with student loan forgiveness.
Well, it was expected because he and the Secretary for Education had indicated that this was coming down the pike. The press secretary had indicated that it was coming down the pike. Up until it happening, most people were trying to figure out the details. How much would it be? Who would it be extended for? And how far will it go in terms of the dollar amount?
So talk to me about the forgiveness itself. Let's walk through it. For somebody who may not be so familiar, what exactly did the president sign on to?
Yeah, effectively what he said was, if you are an individual who is in possession of a federal student loan, not a private student loan, but sponsored and backed by the government, then you would get $10,000 wiped out of your debt if you are an eligible individual. If you received a Pell Grant, you would get an additional $10,000. All of this has to be done by the individual who's impacted. So they will outline a system. You have to log into the portal. You have to fill out a questionnaire. And then over time, by the end of the year, depending on how quickly this goes through, your loan would see that deduction in your account, right? There are a lot of people saying, well, if you do it, then why not just use the information you have for people on the books and just wipe out the debt? That additional step of having someone go in and certify seems like there might be people who either get confused. What if the system fails? We've seen government systems online fail at times because of the massive amount of people who are overloading the system, right? So there are already people who say there's some bureaucratic kinks here that could have been ironed out. But nonetheless, it is here. And for those who are eligible to take advantage of it, when the appropriate time comes and they release the guidance and the instructions, I'm certain they will do that.
Yeah. So as we look now, what has been your response, or not your response, but the response that you've been hearing? Because I know you've got boots on the ground. You know a lot of people that have been out there impacted by this. What has been the response of people? Have they been pleased with what the president did? Because there is a growing sentiment, and it continues to grow daily, of that's nice, but could have did more.
Yeah, it depends on who I talk to. If you're an individual with the federal student debt and you owe close to $20,000 and you had a Pell Grant, you are trying to plan your next vacation to somewhere tropical or European, right? If you're someone who had a federal student loan, including a Pell Grant, and you owed about 100 plus thousand dollars, you are uh, upset that the president didn't go too far, right? With $50,000 or more, right? If you're someone who has a private student loan, you're trying to figure out which bridge you can hold up, right? Trying to protest because now you don't get anything, right? Because this is only for federal borrowers. So it depends on who you talk to. A lot of my colleagues in the financial literacy space are really trying to increase awareness around financial literacy, i.e., not taking out loans or as many loans to begin with, right? Because this is a problem that the president has solved while he is president. It's an executive order, it leaves with him, right? A new president can come in and wipe out the executive order, institute his own executive order that trumps this. And so the issue here is because it's not legislation, right?
Mhm.
It doesn't have staying power. So, what happens for the president that succeeds President Biden? What about the president 20 years from now? There will be arguably no debt forgiveness for them if you have a loan then. So, then what you have to deal with is the lingering issue of the massive overproliferation of student loans in this country, right? From private and public institutions. We need to be pressing private institutions to utilize a lot of the money endowments, in many cases in the tens of millions, if not billions of dollars that these institutions are sitting on, while their students, who are arguably some of the brightest in the country, have to tap into private and federal student loans, right? We have to deal with the fact that college is just incredibly expensive depending on where you go for the outcome, which is the dream we used to sell people. Go to school, take out the debt, get a job, and you pay it back. We have to reject that because if you go to school, you take out the loans, and you get a job, it really does matter what kind of job you get. If you take out $50,000 a year in debt, you graduated with 200,000 plus dollars. What if you get a job in marketing or business development and you only make 40 or $50,000 a year and you're in New York City? Now you have the debt payment. Now you have rent. Now you have groceries. Now you have all these other expenses that are on your plate. You don't really think that those people feel like they've achieved the American dream.
Mhm.
There are people who make lifelong altering decisions based on their student debt because they have that monthly payment, either individually or if you marry someone who also has debt. You don't take out a $500,000 mortgage, you take out a $200,000 mortgage. Instead of traveling across the country to vacation by airplane, you might have to pack up the kids and the dog and put them in a station wagon, right? It changes the way you live your life. And so people are saying, how is it fair for people who've taken 15, 20 years to pay off their debt? They did everything right. They took out a mortgage on the cheaper home because that's what they could afford. Instead of buying brand new cars, they just leased them every 3 years, and maybe they bought them used. And they were susceptible to shady practices from alley mechanics who didn't know what they were doing because they couldn't spend the extra 10, 15, $20,000 on a brand new car because they were paying off student debt. They finally get to a place of economic independence, and maybe they paid their loans off too soon. Maybe if they had let an extra $10,000, $20,000 saddle around, they could have gotten it forgiven had they known this was going to come when it was going to come. So there's all kinds of funky stuff that smells like sewer here to a lot of people, right? And the balance has been tilted. And then people say, well, it doesn't have to affect everybody in order for it to be fair. I've never heard something so ridiculous in my life. Of course, it should affect everyone in order to be fair. Taxpayers are paying for it. It should be fair to everyone. People who paid off their debt. What if you decided you didn't want to go to college? You just couldn't afford to go to college. Now you're also paying taxes to help alleviate this debt for everybody else. If policies aren't equitable, what the heck do we have policies for? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So people are saying if you want to make it a level playing field, the only thing you can do is to educate young people on what a student loan is, how much it's going to cost before they take the money out, and then do an analysis. If in your prospective job field, you're projected to make X amount of dollars in your first 2 to 3 years of employment, you really shouldn't take out a loan that's greater than that amount for the entirety of your 4 years. That might force people to a public school. It might force them to community college first, but at least they're being responsible about the debt that they take out. And that's the message we need to be teaching.
Yeah. I want to talk to you about this because when we really break down financial literacy, it's a shame that so many people go to school, graduate, they graduate from high school, grammar school, and even get to college and still not receive the adequate amount of education when it comes to financial literacy. Because what you said really boils down to someone who may have that level of financial literacy that seems to be so lacking. How do we improve this for people to become better financially astute?
It has to be embedded in the curriculum. It has to be treated as seriously as a heart attack, right? It has to be treated as seriously as diabetes, right? It has to be really up there on the cure for some of the most aggressive cancers in the world. And that might sound like an exaggeration to some people, but let me tell you, when you grow up in a family and you don't have a lot of resources, and then you wake up one day and you want to bring your family out of poverty, but you're not doing it the way that people who have the education are doing it because you're not taught it. It wasn't in your curriculum. You didn't go to the library after school and study it on your own. But for people who do have it in their curriculum, you know what they do? You know what they do?
What do they do?
They understand the economic situation of their debt. They say, wait a second, if I don't want to go to this school, let the school give me some money. Let them share in the burden. They get a second job. They hustle. And you know what they do? They pay off the debt because they recognize how trickle effect it can have. When we start telling people, just take out debt willy-nilly, you know what? Then people, they take out student debt. They have a car loan for their car. They have a mortgage over here for their home. They have a timeshare in the place they barely visit, right? They have thousands of dollars in credit card debt they can't afford, right? We're willy-nilly glorifying debt. And I don't think we need to be doing that. There is a way to encourage going to college and taking out loans and not being in massive amounts of debt.
Yeah, but you know, there are people who prey on that. I honestly know that I accrued a great amount of debt in college. Simply because,
How much?
Oh, I mean, but I'm not talking about student loans. I'm talking about credit cards. This is where I got jacked. I mean, I had, as soon as I went to college, there were guys out there with the credit card applications right there on the campus who were trying to get students to get into debt. And me with my dumb self, you know, I filled out a couple of applications, and before you know it, you know, you're $20,000 in, and you know, I lacked in the area of literacy, but there was an aggressive game that was being played on the part of lenders to try to get these students in there to get them into debt, and so I wholeheartedly agree, because I think that had I had a level of real understanding of what this really means, I think I make a different decision. I know I make a different decision.
Yeah.
But because there was nothing there in front of me, it was like, okay, I'll take advantage of this. And before you know it, I ran the cards up and I thought I'd have a job. And the job didn't come fast enough. And as soon as school is over, what happens. We have to pay this debt. And how am I going to pay it? I don't even have. And so now my credit is starting to take a hit. And all of a sudden, many people enter into a downward spiral, and it happens because of that. So I want to get your thoughts on that. But let me take a break first and come back and talk to you in a moment. Back here with Roy Paul, continuing our conversation. And Roy's been sharing with us a little bit about President Biden's plan on student loan forgiveness. I gave my little story before the break about how I got hooked in right before college, and I had to take the break, but I'll let you respond.
Yeah, and this is a personal question. Daren, did you know before you graduated college what your monthly payment was going to be for your loans?
No.
Yeah. And unfortunately, there are tons and tons of people listening to this program who went to college, took out loans, and didn't really understand what their monthly payment was going to be until they graduated, right? And of course, then it's too late because you already have the debt. You have to sink or swim. That's a critical flaw in our system. There is nothing more predatory because there isn't any other loan that I can think of in your adulthood that would allow you to take out the loan and not understand the monthly payment or how you're going to pay it back. They certainly would never let you do that with a mortgage. They certainly would never let you do that if you're trying to lease a car. They want to know, so much so that you can pay for it, that they force you to take out full insurance on your car just in case you crash it so they get their money. Right?
Absolutely.
So it is unconscionable that we allow people, especially those, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, who are pursuing careers that aren't lucrative, right? I'm not saying they can't be lucrative if you have the right connections or if you're entrepreneurial or you do your own thing. But by and large, we know what average salaries are for certain industries. If you want to be a nurse, if you want to go into marketing, if you want to be a school teacher, if you want to work in public school or charter school, there are ways to figure out how much a salary is for someone who works at Harlem Children's Zone or something like that. So when we know this, and we know that if you're making between $50,000 to $70,000 in a metropolis like New York, then we throw on six-figure debt, and we're shocked that young people are being forced out of their neighborhoods due to gentrification because they can't afford to live in the communities that they grew up in or they probably serve with their employment. Really was shocked that there were people who were delaying the decision to have children, sometimes into their late 20s, early 30s, and beyond. Right? We're shocked when people decide not to have kids at all. Right? Why? Where do we think all this money is coming from for people? It's not. And if you're first generation American to go to college, if you're someone who is trying to figure out to get your family out of poverty, you have the degree and you have the debt, but you still have the responsibility that is unspoken to your family. So you're paying off your debt, you're trying to get an apartment, you got to probably help mom, dad, your siblings, right? There is so much pressure on you and you feel like you've made it, but $100,000 isn't making it anymore. That's why you find people really pushing aggressively the pandemic, really focused on people's mental health because people were having nervous breakdowns, right? This has such a profound impact on people's lives that we don't really want to talk about, much more than just taking out the debt. And that's why we have to focus on the root cause. I don't care about the stigma about community colleges. Go anyway. I really don't care that you think that your public school degree from CUNY is not going to make you as competitive as someone who went to a private institution. Go there anyway. I don't care about the societal stigma. When you talk to someone and they tell you their kid is about to go to college, what's the first question people ask?
What
Oh, where's
college?
it going?
Right. What
And
college?
internally, there's personal, and I hate to say this, but there is personal shame that family members have, that the student has, when they say, I'm going to CUNY.
Mhm.
We want people to say, oh, he's going to Harvard. Oh, he's going to Columbia, right? So when you say something that's not universal, people feel ashamed about that. So they want to go to the best school they think they can go to that most people will recognize.
Mhm.
You got to stop that.
Yeah, you do have to. We do have to do a better job of status, elitism, something that's American culture, and unfortunately, that's what a lot of people chase. I want to talk about for a few minutes. I got time left. That sensibility, because we're talking about making sense of this, right? Talk about the work that you do at Sensibility and how maybe some young people, some parents can really get connected to find out about financial literacy.
You know, I'm so blessed and honored that I am able to do a job that I enjoy. It is my passion project. It's my hobby. In many cases, I can do it in my sleep almost.
Mhm.
But I love what I do. And I love even more who we do it for. 93% of our students come from low and moderate income backgrounds. They're not wealthy people, and they don't come from wealthy families. But what we're trying to do, like most nonprofits, like all nonprofits, is to make a dent, even if it's a small one, to right an institutional wrong, right? Financial illiteracy is institutionally wrong. So we do the little bit that we can to make a moderate amount of difference for as many people as we can. And if anyone wants to join in our work, whether as a donor or a volunteer, or just a supporter or cheerleader on the sidelines who's rooting us on, I encourage them to go to our website and find a way in which they can be the most helpful and supportive of our cause.
So when we talk about the work that's being done, what do you think is the greatest, uh, I would say, the greatest obstacle to people really walking in financial literacy? Because there's some stumbling blocks out there, but what do you find to be the greatest stumbling block that keeps people from embracing financial literacy? Because in some communities, it's not sexy enough, right? And I hate to say it, but in some communities, it's not viewed as, well, it's important until it actually hits them in the pocket.
Yeah, unfortunately, we deal with a lot of issues. We deal with fear, right? Fear of success. We deal with generational poverty. My grandparents didn't have anything. My parents didn't have anything. Now I have a little bit of something and I'm having a hard time dealing with that. right? I know someone who graduated college with debt. There was 4 kids in his family. And he said, you know why financial literacy is so important to me? Because I went to the fast food restaurant for dinner, and my siblings and I would get a burger, and we would cut it into 4 pieces, and that was dinner for that night. He remembers the first time he was able to take his family to a steakhouse dinner, and the look on their faces at the end when the check came and he picked it up, and they just had a feast, right? There wasn't a dry eye at the table because they all remember what it was like going to the fast food restaurant and taking a burger and cutting it up into 4 pieces, right? This stuff can be life-changing, but people are afraid of it. And I always encourage people to embrace the change wherever it is in your life, career-wise, and also financial. There should be a huge pride on your back to be debt-free, to be living a fiscally responsible life. But I understand why people don't. Because if you take someone out for dinner, there's pressure on you to take them to a nice dinner, right? And when you drive around in a car, you want it to be a nice car. And so I understand the societal pressures when people say, I live on Park Avenue, and what they think that means about who they are as an individual and their status to have made it, right? It's not sexy to tell someone, I live on Gun Hill Road in the Bronx.
I'm sorry.
And there's nothing wrong with Gun Hill Road. But people want to say, I live in the posh tower with the doorman, right? So when you're dealing with all of these factors and people who judge you based on your perceived status, when it has nothing to do with who you are, we say the heck with our knowledge. Let's show off who we are by the jobs we have, the homes we live in, the cars we drive, and the way we go on vacation. You have to be very careful with Instagram, okay? Because just because someone put a picture of a private jet doesn't mean that they were on the private jet. They literally could have been at the tarmac, saw the private jet, took a picture, put it on Instagram and said, flying in style. They weren't even on the plane, right? And there's no way to know that they weren't on the plane. So we have to be careful with that.
Yeah, gotta be careful with that. I gotta leave it there, Roy, but I want to thank you so much for being with us. I think we got a lot to take into consideration. You've been a great guest in terms of giving us some information. And of course, I want our public, if you have the opportunity to support Sensibility, I want you to be able to do that. He's been a great advocate for the show, but not only a great advocate for the show, but he also does great work in that financial arena. Roy, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. We made it. We did it.
Yes, we did. Roy Paul, our guest here on Perspectives. I want to let you know that about wraps up for this show. I want to thank you for watching and make sure to share your perspective with somebody else because you don't know. It just might make a difference in somebody else's life. Take care.
Make a difference in someone's life. Express what's in your heart and your mind. Share your perspective.